broadcast is coming to you from the European Training Foundation. We are the EU agency that supports developing and transition countries to modernize their education and training systems to promote jobs, growth, and social inclusion. And with us today, we have Eldisa Zhebo from Albania. And Eldisa is Executive Director of the Albanian Institute for Change and Leadership. So welcome, Eldisa.
Thank you.
And we have Siria Taurelli, Senior Human Capital Development Expert from the European Training Foundation. And Siria coordinates the ETF's work in the area of governance and quality assurance. So welcome, Siria.
Hello, everyone.
And resilience is what enables societies to withstand shocks and disruptions, as we have experienced with the recent COVID-19 pandemic. And it's what enables them to adapt to rapid and far-reaching changes, as we are experiencing with the digital revolution and the green transition. And today we're going to talk about what resilience means for governance. How can state and non-state actors contribute to resilient governance? What is the role of civil society? And how can we build trust in public institutions to overcome challenges and build resilient ecosystems for lifelong learning and employment? And before we start our questions, I'd like to welcome all our followers out there from all over the world who are watching us today. And I'd like to encourage you all to get onto the chat and tell us who you are, where you're from, and as we go through the conversation, to share your comments and your questions with us. And I hope to be able to pick up some of your questions and put them to our panel members later on in the show. So Eldisa, before we start, you're the Executive Director of the Albanian Institute for Change and Leadership. Can you tell us a little bit about your organization? What are you trying to achieve in Albania, and how do you do it?
The Institute for Change and Leadership in Albania is founded in 2011 with the leadership and support of few Albanian women, and we have embraced the support and interest of other experts and partners into our journey. The objective of the Institute is to empower people, systems, and organizations into their journey for achieving development results. In our institution, we deal with various development projects, studies and policy papers, and we have also in our core issues like migration, vocational education, labor issues, adult education, sustainable development and sustainable employment, and entrepreneurship. On all of our interventions, we try to, at the core, for us is capacity development, it's learning and education, so that people take the ownership for their change and are prepared for a planned change or for uncertainty moments like the one we're going now.
Okay, thank you, Eldisa. I can see we've got exactly the right person to join in this conversation about resilience and governance. So just before we go to our questions, I'd just like to say hi to Afef, who's following us from Tunisia. We've got Khaled in Jordan, and we've also got Nahida in Jordan. We've got Kimete from Kosovo, and we've got Roberta from Italy. So we've got an international audience here. Keep introducing yourselves on the chat and share your questions and your comments with us as we go through the conversation. So let's get on with our questions now. Eldisa, first of all, what do we mean by resilience in the governance of education, training, and employment?
While resilience is a word that is used in many contexts, from individual moments when we are faced with shocks. In general, the keywords are linked with what we call unpredictable change, such as the ability to buffer, to reorganize, to survive, to restart, learn, and adapt to the new change. However, today we all face a far less predictable and stable situation when we have a change and uncertainty which we live today, like is the COVID pandemic, floods, natural disasters like Albania has gone into heavy earthquakes, uh, politics, geopolitics, the Brexit situation, our countries like people from Balkan countries, politics into entering into EU. And all those dilemma and uncertainties that we have, we should also be prepared in terms of education for what are the changes of tomorrow, what the future calls us, like technology, digitalization, innovation, new resources, green economies, green societies, etc. It's very on a change perspective. It's sometimes it's very difficult to articulate, but I would like to quote a very simple definition that is done by two experts, is Dante Disparte and Les Williams, which in their article, The Unbroken Chain in a Resilient Society, they define resilience in a very simple way. They call prepared people in prepared households. It means that exploring in terms of governance, we need to exploring new forms of knowledge to be used tomorrow. And which means people need to be prepared with new forms of resources, such as new technologies, new collective management systems, new partnership, and refined roles in prepared households with this new type of governance.
Okay. Thank you. Just one question on top of that. I mean, Albania is a country that is emerging from quite a, let's say, traumatic period in its history of change. Do you think that a country in transition like Albania is more resilient, perhaps, than some of our more settled Western societies?
To be resilient, you need to have the knowledge, you need to have the experience, you need to have the means, and you need to have the systems. The shocks, including the COVID and including the earthquake, has shown that countries with poor economies and poor systems have more difficulty in being resilient when they are faced with unpredictable change.
Right. Okay. So it's a question of, let's say, it's got a lot to do with resources then, and having systems in place.
And knowledge.
And the knowledge. Okay. So, and we're here to share the knowledge. So we're all listening. I'd just like to say hello to Dris from Morocco and from Meltem from Turkey. So our range of countries is expanding as we go along. So I'm going to pass over to Siria now. I'm going to put her in the middle of the screen there. Siria, so who are the non-state and state actors in resilient governance, and how can each of these different actors contribute to coping with the sort of pressures and changes that Eldisa was talking about?
Well, state and non-state actors include a wide range of organizations, from ministries, local authorities, national agencies, public providers of education, training and services to employment. And of course, they do belong to the family of the state organization or state actors, as we like to say. And on the other hand, we have private sector, we have companies, enterprises, sectoral associations, as well as civil society and other types of non-governmental organizations. It's important to consider all of them because they all form part of education, adult learning, support to employment systems. And even more so, if we consider lifelong learning as our system. Lifelong learning implies non-formal and informal learning, self-learning, non-structured or non-organized or non-certified learning, along with formal education and training. Therefore, such a system is wider. We have to think of an extended and somehow a little bit more fluid system, which embraces a larger spectrum of actors and organizations. So all of them together are the state and non-state actors. And since uncertainty is here to stay, we are getting used to disruptions and change. These are not exceptional events. They are more like becoming the norm. And it's important that we get prepared to this state of play, to these disruptions and change. And a system which is complex and articulated, such as a lifelong learning system, requires mechanisms that allow for consultation and decision making, although taking into account this complexity. For example, what are these consultation and decision making for? They are needed to work out a common understanding among all these different organizations. And this is important to have a common understanding and a vision because they have to coordinate their actions one with another, even in period of crisis. There is need for mechanisms that facilitate consultation in a flexible ways. And now we have technology that can help with that. So it's important that these state and non-state actors together, they review the existing arrangements, because the question is, are what we have in place in terms of platforms, in terms of councils, agreements that were agreed a while ago, are they still fit for purpose? Do they currently involve all the actors that should be involved because they contribute to lifelong learning and they offer services to employment? So there is an important reality check to make in order to be prepared. So preparedness is an important aspect of resilience. But the second important aspect is to improve, to learn from the crisis, from the difficult period, and to develop from it. So they should be able, all these organizations should be able to not only to cope with, to be prepared to difficult moments, but also to learn. So the notion of organizational learning, it's very important in context of resilience. So to be prepared to, on one side, and on the other side, there is an aspect of organizational learning. And this is very important for all these actors.
Okay, so thanks, Siria. I'd just like to call out to Entela from Albania, and also we have an old friend of ours, Dorina Islami. Hi there. And we have a follower from Pakistan who is not giving their name, so we're really going global today. I think that's an important message that we got from both Eldisa and Siria there about learning. I'd just like to ask our followers out there, I mean, we've all been through difficult times with COVID. We're all facing the challenges of the recovery. Do you have examples from your country that you can share with us? Or if you have any questions for the panel, please share them in the chat. So, and talking about examples, I'm going to come back to Eldisa and say, ask her what examples you have from Albania about how partnerships are helping to build resilient ecosystems in education and employment.
Well, as as Siria said, we in the moment of crisis and uncertainty, a new type of governance, which is more flexible, takes place, and this is one of the learning that we would like to share. Albania in early 2020 was both shocked by the earthquake that we had at the end of 2019 and the pandemic that began at the early 2020. And it brought immediately uncertainty, economic, financial insecurity, also what we call the health insecurity, social insecurity. Many closure of many businesses, both for the cause of earthquake and also of the pandemic, brought an impact on numerous industries, a population that lost their job. The education and vocational education system, we're not talking about the health system here, of Albania was not built to deal with the shutdowns that we had. Teachers, administrators, students were affected, and although they were trying to keep the learning alive, the new forms of organization, flexible structures, the introduction of IT showed that not only the system was not prepared, but in disproportionately way, it affected the most disadvantaged, the ones who lack the resources and also the digital skills. And also at the municipal level, municipal would deal with immediate basic services. They were also faced with immediate needs for assistance to those that are more vulnerable, were faced with insufficient financial resources to provide adequate support, were faced with situations where they couldn't identify the vulnerable groups, etc. And also infrastructure for communication and information, including the IT. The situation has revealed a new role for both businesses and also the civil society organizations, and required new forms of partnerships. And these partnerships were guided by who has the resources, who has the knowledge, and who has the experience, and who has the access. And the CCOs brought into this new form of a governance a new role, with their capacity to be closer to communities, to target beneficiaries, having the flexibility for adjustment, including the business side. And the CCOs have they are passionate and committed to their beneficiaries. And more than 300, through a study that we conducted in 2020, more than 300 civil society organizations have been involved both on social and educational services. And they were involved in education, into awareness raising and advocacy for promotion of systems and solutions that were happening at the local level. And they were also involved into skills promotion, like Siria mentions, like competences, learning to learn, teamwork, leadership, communication, also technical competencies which could serve people immediately to enter into normal life and normal economy, like simple vocational skills, digital skills, and other job-related skills. And also, it came also strongly the activities which are not traditional, like non-formal training courses, supporting people through informal learning from peers, self-learning, which are new forms of motivating people to enter into what is called a new normal life, into a COVID situation that we're living today.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we're beginning to get some interesting questions from the audience here, and I can see from Meltem in Turkey is asking quite a challenging question. I think she is saying that resilient is a popular title, but it is no common description how we can create coordination with a different description. Now that reminds me of an interview I saw with a person from Lebanon who was saying, well, everyone says how resilient the Lebanese are, but we don't want to be resilient. We want to have a normal life. So, I mean, is resilience the right word, or is there another way of describing what we're talking about, that ability to adapt and to bounce back from challenges? I think I'll go, Eldisa, you've been speaking. I'll ask Siria first what her reaction to that is.
Yes. Well, I don't have a full answer, but I agree that there are different definitions. There is no a unique single definitions. However, these different ways to describe resilience have some elements in common. And one is about the fact that we are talking about dynamics. That's very important. Situations are not static. There is a dynamic. So resilience enters into play, or say the discourse or features of resilience enter into play when we talk about dynamics. And the other important thing that various definitions have in common is the interlinkages, the interconnection between different events, the fact that one impacts the other, interlinkages between different actors, as we say, different institutions, public, private, non-governmental, and so on. So these two aspects of, say, a dynamic situation, a transition, a change situation, and the interconnectedness, you can find in all the different definitions. So I think it's important that we extract these common features, in my view.
Okay, thanks, Siria. Eldisa, do you have anything to say on this topic from our follower in Turkey who's challenging the concept of resilience?
As Siria said, there is no, there are many definitions, and I think all the definitions are right for the right situation. And as Siria said, there are certain core aspects in terms of resilience, and it's about, as I said, like being prepared and feeling safe when you are faced with shocks, with changes, with unpredictable situation. And I think that the new norm is that the situation is unpredictable. So people of today need to be resilient, and resilient means that you are aware of what is happening around. So you don't ignore what is happening. So, and you accept, and you base it on your knowledge, and you base it on the collective knowledge on the situation you are. It might be a community knowledge, it might be a country knowledge, it might be a family knowledge, or might be an industry knowledge. So that is much important. And then the other thing is, as Siria said, you connect. You cannot be resilient alone. Your resilience is built because you are within a system. And understanding what kind of partnership you need to be in the same partnership, or you need to move out in a new partnership. Sometimes you choose, sometimes you are thrown in, but understanding where you are and learning from what is happening with an open mind and being able to change is something that is important in any situation that we live in. I hope I added something into the discussion. So.
No, I think, I think it's, from what you're saying, it sounds to me like that resilience is a useful word in that it brings together a lot of ideas around awareness of change, adaptability, reactiveness, flexibility. So I think Meltem, if you maybe don't like the word, but it is useful and helpful, and I think it structures a bit of our ideas about how societies should be able to cope with shock and change and adapt to them. So I've got another question here, and this is directed to Syria specifically, from Khaled. He is saying, what kind of support for vulnerable students to reflect them in the national education policy agenda, and how can private sector be effective in this? So a very interesting question, Khaled, about vulnerable students, how to integrate them, and what can the private sector do in this area. So Siria.
Well, fortunately, we have many examples, in fact, of private companies that do care for vulnerable students. We have had last week a very interesting presentation, for example, from Turkey about an important sector that is able to include that students or trainees or apprenticeship in their companies. We had another example of a partnership between an NGO, non-government organization, a set of companies in a local level in Serbia, about the fact that services were provided to help the vulnerable students and former students access employment opportunities with the help and with the support of companies. So there are many examples. We know how to do it. There is a lot of knowledge and a lot of practice. The challenge is to raise these examples to the level of policy. And I think the question is very nicely and rightly formulated, because we need to move from individual examples to a more systemic approach. There are policies that are able to promote and provide incentives, but also set certain conditions on the private sector regarding the inclusion of vulnerable students into employment, into their companies and sectoral organizations. So I think we have, as I said, from several countries, very good examples, not only in Europe, but in the partner countries, the countries the ETF cooperates with. So, but the lesson is that the policies must be, say, intentional. There must be an intention in the policy to address the issue, because the problem, if there is a problem, doesn't solve by itself. It really requires specific measures, and these measures shall be very targeted. This is also one lesson we learned from the survey we carried out, not only on private sector, but also on civil society organizations, that we need those type of organization or people that mediate the various needs at local level, that they know the situation, and they are able to intervene. So the policies and measures shall be targeted, shall take into account local situation, local context, and they should involve mediators, non-government organization, not necessarily only the private sector, but to create a system where different organizations cooperate in order to improve the employability and actual employment of vulnerable people.
Okay, thank you very much, Siria. I think we'll just go back to our script for a minute. We've got another interesting question about civil society, which is addressed to Eldisa. But seeing as my next question for you, Siria, is about civil society, I'll let you speak about that topic first, and then we'll come back to Eldisa with the specific question. So Siria, how can civil society contribute to enhancing resilience and sustainability in education and training, and what is the added value of civil society in governance?
Well, I think we can further develop from what we were saying earlier, the fact that civil society organizations are closer to communities, to the community level, to the local situation. They are able to assess and to respond to needs, even of people who are meeting difficulty, adversity, groups of population that are more vulnerable. And this is a very great knowledge they possess, but they also possess the capacity to address these specific needs. And therefore, it's very important to involve civil society and civil society representatives into the governance. As we said at the beginning, lifelong learning and transition from learning to employment or from employment to learning is a very articulated and complex system, right? It requires many types of interventions. And all actors and all organizations, be them public, private, non-governmental, shall take part into the governance. What is the governance? The governance is the process of consultation, the process of decision-making, the way policies are formulated and implemented. So having the civil society who is so close to the local needs and specific needs, it adds value to the governance. And last but not least, civil society organizations are also able to bring a method to the governance, because they're used to work in partnerships among different civil society organizations, so horizontal partnerships, as well as with the private sector, with local employment services, or with national agencies at government level. And therefore, this method of partnerships or bridging between different realities and different viewpoint and different type of interests, it really can add to the governance to make it more participatory, more flexible, and more responsive to the real needs of the varied groups of population.
Okay, thanks, Siria. And here I'm going to put Eldisa on the spot here, because we've got a very pertinent question from Denise in Italy. I mean, often we've seen in this recent crisis, when there's a crisis, often the public authorities, the governments are slow to act, and it's in those circumstances that civil society organizations really step into the breach. And Denise is asking, would you say that crises provide an opportunity for civil society to engage better in governance, to get more involved in governance in a structured way?
Well, thank you, Denise, for the question. I would say, unfortunately, yes. Because yes, as I said, it's like the governance changes in the crisis situation of who has the easiest, more flexible access to knowledge, to community, to resources. So in that sense, it becomes a role of the civil society. It shows off more, because civil society is always there. And the learning is that how can we tap on these types of experiences where we see a more flexible systems, so that we define new roles in the times of uncertainties that we live. The world is not certain anymore. We have many questions on many things, and what decisions are made on the knowledge that we had under control today are not the same tomorrow. We have like businesses that have embraced agendas of SDGs. They go more on social responsibilities than the government sometimes. The government cannot control what digital technology and Facebook and internet is sharing, we have cross-border. The COVID has posed different types of systems of how we become more resilient within the nations or cross borders. So it's more than ever the uncertainty and the frequent change is the norm. So how the question is, yes, they engage, and I would say better in the governance and for good, but how can we tap into these types of forms to ensure that they are used in a more sustainable way?
Okay, thank you very much, Eldisa. Now, seeing as you've got the floor now, I'm going to move on to one of our prepared questions. In times of crisis, in times of challenge, I mean, trust is a very important factor. How can we build trust in public institutions, and what is the role of leadership in that?
Now, trust, it's a term that we can discuss over like the resilience, but is a process, it's an act which needs to be built and maintained in a relationship, which means in any type of a situation. And when we talk about the change, and when we talk about when we are on a resilient processes, there are certain factors that need to be taken into consideration that can, all of them combined can build upon the act of trust. And this is, the first one is knowledge, the other one is the experience, the other one is communication, the other one is familiarity, and an important one is decision making. All of these in a triangle of government, civil society, and business output, all of these need to be considered. And with regard to knowledge, many times in the table of trust, the knowledge comes from communities, which the CSOs, the civil society, can articulate, but it can come also from the business. Government many times have many processes so you can have access to the knowledge. In terms of communication, government has a vast role to create the space for communication to happen in a speed, in a trustful way, and in having a leadership mindset. In a leadership mindset, it means that we need to have information and communication even when we don't have information. So being honest, being vulnerable, sometimes the government is faced with decisions that maybe they don't have the capacities. But communicating to your constituents, communicating to your communities, it takes a leadership even to show your vulnerability and to seek for support. It's very important in the trust process. I would say that also the leadership comes into the decision making. So participatory governance, it's very much important. As I said, like we see a participatory governance more in the times of crisis than in a normal decision making or when we make a governance for policies. So a leadership into how we can make a more comprehensive governance on things that impact us all at the same way is something that a leadership from government should come in a more systematic way. In terms of communication, civil society, it's very well positioned on what I say, making a simple narrative. being close to community, but also being able to translate policies, decisions, laws in a simple language to the community is something that it's very, it was defined the civil society. In terms of familiarity and experience, civil society organizations are also able, in addition to what Siria says of what civil society brings, it's also showcasing the quick win initiatives, which in the process of building trust, bringing a positive image is very much important in the time of changes and uncertainties. From the perspective of civil society organization, ensuring transparency of information, facilitating knowledge sharing, being on the table where the decisions are made, and bringing voices of the community, as well as translating the voices of the government and the policy makers in a simple language to the community, it's something that it defines a clear role for leadership for civil society organization into this act of trust through going through uncertainty and change.
Okay, thank you very much. It's very interesting what you said about communication, about narrative, and I was reading an article quite recently where they drew a link between let's say the countries where there is a low level of trust in government and in public authority. There's a much higher prevalence of false narratives and conspiracy theories. I mean, do you recognize this, and do you think that civil society can have a role in creating, let's say, truthful narratives and combating misinformation?
Yes. Now, I wouldn't like, we're all adults and grown-ups, and there are discussions also about of the civil society about telling the truth of narratives. So there are every player has their own part. That's why I said it's very much important that it's a systematic approach. It's not about telling only the narrative. CSOs, yes, they are very good of storytelling, of making the narrative, and if that is also used with evidence, it's backed up with positive cases. It's backed up by voices of those that benefit from those narratives. You see actions happening. Yes, there is a role of the civil society, and it is a role for other partners in this process of change where we go through uncertainty.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to move on, and I'm going to put Siria on the spotlight now. We've got an interesting question from Khaled, who is asking, how can we encourage local employers to accept trainee graduates from informal training and satisfy about their competences? So I think the question there is how do you get employers to accept people who are coming with informal skills from the informal education and training?
Yes, this is again about the role of employers, and I would say, just to add to what Eldisa said about leadership in lifelong learning and employment, leadership is diffuse. It's true the government has a special role to drive, to steer, to design policies, But we have also to recognize that there is diffuse leadership. And this is true for civil society organizations as well as for private employers, managers, and private companies. And again, we have a lot of examples about also the situation of accepting students who have trained themselves in an informal manner. At the same time, it is important also that there is an intervention about the recognition of the skills that are learned informally or non-formally. Many countries are devising mechanisms and methods to recognize these type of skills that are acquired through non-formal and informal learning, which is equally valid, but it deserves and it requires to be recognized. And again, we can see that the need for the interplay between the employers that shall enact also their own responsibility and leadership, and the government, which has the responsibility to devise policies and methods and formalize method to make the non-formal and formal learning recognized and validated. And again, we have many examples of that in Europe, but also throughout the world, about the validation of non-formal learning. But again, the underlying element is this interplay between private sector and government, because both should contribute to this process.
Okay, thanks, Siria. Eldisa, do you want to add anything on this topic?
Yes. In addition, what Siria said, yes, there are many countries that are putting systems of what is called the recognition of prior learning, in terms of you might come from informal trainings, you might come as a migrant abroad and you don't have proof of what you have done, or you work into, like our countries, you work into gray economies, into informal jobs. However, as Siria said, the leadership comes from the business, the leadership should come also from individuals. And this is something we do in our institute. Private businesses are not very much into formal papers. So either you know how to do something or you don't know how to do something. So it takes also a leadership on individuals to understand where do they stay and be able to articulate, as I said, to articulate their skills and their competencies, so they can be able to enter and to integrate into the labor market.
Mm-hmm. And if I may add one word, Alastair, I would add to this circle also trade unions, because let's be clear. I mean, a person or a new employees who doesn't have his or her skills recognized, doesn't have evidence about certificate and so on, may bring an element of difference compared to other employees. So it's very important that in the picture and in the conversations we have the trade unions, so that employers and employees representatives, they can agree about a method, about the process, and also about certain conditions for the validation. Why is this important? Because of fair treatment, because we want, or we expect that in any given company, all employees are treated fairly and they compare in a fair manner. That's why it's important to add also the representative of employees and trade unions into this process.
So this is very much part of the decent work agenda.
Absolutely.
Okay, so seeing as you're on the floor, Siria, I'll go back to my script with one of the questions we had before. What is the European Training Foundation? Just so everyone knows out there, we are bringing you this broadcast. Our job is to help countries develop their education and training systems. So can you tell us a bit about what we are doing to support resilient governance for education, training and employment in the countries where we work?
Resilience governance means a governance or a number of structures, a number of mechanisms and devices that are able to make decisions, design policies, make decisions about policies, implement policies in a flexible manner. This is about resilience, but resilience is also about the capacity of all these governance infrastructure to anticipate, to be prepared for the unknown, to cope with change and uncertainty. That's why we are trying to say, or we think that it's important that these infrastructure and mechanisms and devices and committees and councils and agreements between parties are updated from time to time. It's important to make these reviews, this reality check, and say, here's what we have fit for purpose. Maybe some of our arrangements of this council or agreement were designed time ago, and they may need to be refreshed and updated. And this is important to apply on several spheres of say, system governance, to the policy formulation stage, to the moment of the phase of designing a new strategy and vision, to the management of school network, to the social dialogue and social partnership with the private sector, in order to be sure that there are no gaps or less gaps as possible between the supply and the demand of skills and skills development, to the quality assurance and to the financing. All these areas are areas of concern or of interest for governance. So those who make decisions and organize the processes and ensure that policies are implemented, they have to care about all these aspects: school network management, quality assurance, and financing. And let me say a word on financing, which is very important. And we have to recognize that in the last years or decades, the financing of education and training of learning measures has been a little bit neglected. We found in many countries that the allocation, the budget allocation on compared to the GDP for education and training has decreased over time. And we reached a point where we need to revert the trend, because we face, in a period of crisis especially, in widening inequalities, disparities, different opportunities to access the good opportunity for learning, the good opportunities for quality employment. And in order to build back better, and in order to learn and improve and evolve, we need resources. And resources are non-financial. These are the capacity, expertise, knowledge, what we are discussing today. But financial resources are important too. And we want to bring financial resources back and stronger to education, training, and quality employment.
Okay, thanks, Siria. In this context, I'd just like to mention to our listeners that the ETF has a knowledge sharing platform, a knowledge sharing community called Open Space. And I think we've got a link is being posted in the chat there if you're interested in joining that. And on Open Space, you will find, I think it's called the Governance Toolkit. So you will find a whole range of resources on governance. I don't know, Siria, if you want to say 2 words about the Governance Toolkit.
Well, thank you, Alastair. Yes, the Governance Toolkit is a set of concept, approaches, methodologies, as well as practical cases and case studies in the area of regulatory frameworks, in the area of social partnership, in the area of civil society, organization, participation, in the area of monitoring, in the area of financing, and also quality assurance. So we hope that through the, say, more methodological part, but also through the practical cases, anyone can get inspired in order to review and improve the various arrangements, the various committees, consultative procedures, decision-making processes, and overall management of lifelong learning.
Okay, thanks, Siria. So we've got 5 minutes left, and I think we have time to take one more question. We have a very interesting question from Sidita Dibra. I don't know where Sidita is from, but it's
Albania.
Albania. Okay, so we've got you've got your fan club are following you, Eldisa. So Sidita is asking, how can government/public sector and civil society organizations ensure that private sector response in frame of their resilience doesn't negatively affect the most vulnerable persons, e.g. younger employees who might be the first ones in line of fire if, e.g. downsizing is required? So I think that, I mean, the question there, I think, is that, you know, the resilience of the public sector might mean people getting laid off, and in many companies the policy is last in, first out, and often younger people have more fragile work contracts. So Eldisa, can you answer on that question?
Thank you. I will try to answer. Now, I think it. I think during all the questions we were trying to discuss about the resilience in a systemic way. So I don't think that a government and public sector and CSOs can ensure what private sector does alone, and because sometimes the youth are more affected, sometimes the elders are more affected, sometimes the most vulnerable are affected, those that live far away from a business, or women that they don't have a transport, or there are many types of categories. Today, there are, in Albania, for instance, the businesses are affected by young people going abroad. So I think that overall, the response should be that we need to have systems in place. We need that all actors should be in the process of what we call the governance of resilience. So it means that there is a role for businesses, there is a role for trade unions, as Siria said, there is a role for CSO, and there is a role for the government to sit on the table and to ensure the resilience of the situation. And if the situation is lacking capacities, if the situation is people losing their job, if the situation is facing economic situations, etc., I think that's why we said at the beginning that resilience is a word used in a certain situations where we are faced with shock. So the lessons is that people need to have the right qualifications, as we have if we address the younger employees. We need to make sure that their formal, informal learning, whether vocational education or through what of apprenticeship or internship that the youngers go through, it's something that is recognized as qualifications, that the trade unions work, that the governments have put controls over the system, so the businesses report on contracts, on qualifications, of how people are paid, of how people are paid in the times where many businesses might close or they shift the way they do businesses, etc. So overall, in a resilient, the resilience is the ability for us to deal in a systematic way where the governance is not only in the hand of one part, is everyone contributes to keep the system together. All the people feel safe in the same household. So this is how I would describe.
Okay, thank you so very much, Eldisa. I mean, I think that was a very nice way to round off. It's about all being in one house, all being in one family, and I'm very grateful to you for speaking up for old grey heads like myself, and that, you know, young people are important, but we're all important, and we all need to be taken into account, So I'd just like to say to all of our listeners, thank you very much for joining this conversation. And I hope you've taken away some interesting points. We're working on governance, we're working on resilience, we're working on a lot of different subjects at the ETF in supporting all the countries where we work to provide better opportunities for all their people. And to be able to face up to the challenges that are coming down the line for all of our countries in the coming years. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Eldisa. Thank you very much, Siria. And
thank you to you, Alastair. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye. And bye to everyone.